Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samuel Southard, and today I'd like to speak to you on the concept of gender roles in society. For a moment, let's think back to the Native Americans, the indigenous people of North America. For about as long as Native American culture has existed, there have been a group of people called Two-Spirits. Two-Spirits, as the Native Americans called them, were people who existed not within the definitions of the male gender, or not within the definitions of the female gender. They were, as we now refer to people like such, non-binary. This concept in the Native American culture has existed for many, many years, but the concept has not really occurred in Western culture, such as our own or European culture, until modern times. So, today I'd like to speak to you all about how gender roles in society are outdated and in many cases detrimental to the people harmed by them. So, I'd like to start with the homemaking and wage earning aspect of society. So, in the last couple of years, or in the last century, we've seen a drastic change in how money is earned. Before, in the early 1900s and late 1800s, we would have steel moguls like Carnegie demanding high risk, high labor from their employees. And brute strength was often required. And yes, females are genetically not as they're not genetically favored to have strength. Yes, with time and energy they can reach that, but the genetic advantage is towards males. However, nowadays, not as much brute strength is needed. So take, for example, this statistic from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In 1910, 20% of jobs required high strength, whereas now only 12% of jobs in 2016 require this high strength. That percentage has gone down drastically, so not as much strength is necessarily needed in the workplace. Secondly, a common argument against women in the workplace is that they lack the education necessary. This is factually incorrect. Since 1995, women have surpassed men in terms of percentage of the population with bachelor's degrees. So the argument that women lack the education is simply no longer true. And finally, society has switched away from the necessity of a single-earner household. We cannot, take for example, San Francisco. In San Francisco, the poverty line is $117,400 for a family of four. Now the average income there is $63,000. So one single earner cannot possibly hope to meet what is defined as an above the poverty line wage. It simply does not work. So the concept of the concept of a single earner household in which the male brings home the money is simply not possible in certain locations of the world. Next, I'd like to examine the part of the population that is transgender or non-binary. So, the transgender people often face quite a bit of discrimination and segregation due to their due to how they break gender roles. And, that gets so bad for many trans people that they are at statistically much higher rates of suicide or self-harm. For example, trans men, people who were born female but now choose to identify as male, have an over 50% attempted suicide rate. So more than 1 out of every 2 trans men have considered suicide in their lifetime. Considering how, for non-trans people, that rate is in the low 20s, that is incredibly shocking. These people are facing discrimination and odd looks and all sorts of harassment because they choose to go against their assigned gender. So, additionally, if that discrimination and suicide rates was not enough, it's been statistically proven that when you affirm the gender roles, so making it not a violation of their assigned gender, or making it not a violation of gender roles to them, it's been proven that trans people have much lower chances of mental issues such as depression, and they also have higher self-esteem. So, the concept of restrictive gender roles is no longer necessary in the society given how our workplaces change, and in many cases is detrimental to many people in our nation. Thank you.
Well, the Native American customs that you talk about are interesting as an attention device. I don't think that they really do much to identify what the controversy here is. Your proposition is that the traditional gender roles are outdated and potentially harmful. So you've got multiple claims in the proposition. That's, I think, a problem. There's not really a preview of what the supporting structure is going to be, so you've got some issues that you're going to be faced with there. I do think that you managed to address that a little bit in the body of the speech, because for the most part you do provide us with some structure, and I can hear the claims that you're presenting. Actually, I shouldn't call them claims. I can hear the points that you're presenting. Sometimes it's just an informational point and there's no particular claim built into it, and I think that that's a little bit of a problem, because I'm not sure why we spent the time looking at what the job roles are, the strength that's required, a presupposition that about women's education that has probably been outmoded for 40 plus years, and you're kind of dispelling it. I'm not sure anybody subscribes to those kinds of precepts anymore, but that's mostly got to do with having two earners or a gender equity issue, which doesn't seem like it's at all connected to the transgender issue that seems like most of what your argument's about, given what the introduction is and given what your last point is. So I think that that's a little bit problematic. You've got hypothetical examples. There's some statistical information on the differences between men and women and the strength issue that you've talked about. And you did have a source citation on that. There's not really a source citation for the data on women outnumbering men for the bachelor's degrees. I know that that's generally true, but you ought to have a source for that particular information. Same thing with the San Francisco income levels. I think that you probably have that data. It came from a reasonable source, but it's not being cited here, and I think that's a little bit of a problem. There were a couple of places, though, where there wasn't any data that supports your position. For example, near the end of your argument, you say that once the gender roles of transgenders have been accepted, that there's a much less greater chance that they're going to suffer from mental issues, and I need to see some evidence on that. And you don't present any evidence on that. You take that as a given without providing us any proof for that. And I think that that is definitely problematic. It's delivered in a very calm, deliberate manner, and I think that that helps add a lot of credibility to your presentation. But like I said, the first couple of arguments seem largely irrelevant to the question of transgendered issues, and then on that fourth point concerning the impact of the transgendered issues on the third point, you also kind of assume that the discrimination is the thing that causes the mental issues that are going on there, and I'm not exactly sure that that is the causality that's shown in whatever information is presented here. That was a little ambiguous, so I think you have to be a little more specific there. All right, enjoy your rehearsal.